Now we're going to discuss hyperboloid of one sheet. This is another quadric surface that you should be familiar with. Here's the standard form of this particular surface. It's very similar to ellipsoid, except that we have a negative sign here. So everything almost identical except that negative sign, so that way you can tell there's one negative sign with your standard form in ellipsoid. It's a hyperboloid of one sheet. So all terms are squared, equals to a constant, which is 1, and there's one negative sign. Now, the center of this shape is going to be at XO, YO, and ZO. And then from there, you can start sketching. And before I show you the basic shape of this, I'm going to show you the traces in two-dimensional space first, so that you have an idea where we're getting the picture from in 3D. So if I let's say, x equals to xo, meaning I make x term disappear. So that's the equation I'm looking at. If that's the equation, then it's a hyperbola along the y-axis. So let's draw that. So if x disappears, then in x and yz plane, the traces are going to be hyperbolas. And similarly, if I let y disappear, so y equals y naught, then you still have your traces in the xz plane to be hyperbolas as well. And now if we let z go to 0, if z is 0, then if z is equal to z naught, then in xy plane, we're then looking at, check this out. So this is gone. Then we're looking at that equation. This equation could be a circle or an ellipse, depending on A and B. So let's just call it an ellipse. So the traces could be an ellipse or circles, depending on what A and B are. So let me show you how it looks like in YZ plane, and then I'll show you the 3D image, just one trace. So here's our YZ plane. So we know it's a hyperbola, so for that, I'm going to ignore the x component and only focus on these variables right here. So it's going to be a hyperbola. So center at some y naught and z naught. Let's assume they're at 0. Then in the y direction, you're going to go b units. So here's one hyperbola, and here's another hyperbola. So this distance, it's going to be whatever yo is plus b. And then in the opposite direction, you also do the same thing, yo minus b in that direction. So that's how it looks like in YZ plane. Now let's put this in three-dimensional space. So we have our X, Y, and Z plane right here. So keep in mind the traces, and then we'll put all of it together in this plane. Now let's draw the negative axes as well. So here's the negative z-axis. Here's the negative x-axis. And here's the negative y-axis. Now, if you look at the standard form, since z has the negative sign, the picture will be along the z-axis. So whichever variable has the negative sign, that's where your picture will be along. So I'm going to draw my ellipses first. So in the xy plane. So that's this piece right here. We have circles or ellipses. So in x direction, we go A units, y direction, we go B units. So let's suppose this is A and this is B. And you can also do negative A, negative B, but let's keep it simple. So this is our circle or ellipse, whatever you want to call it, in the xy plane. So this point is actually negative A, and this is your negative B. Now in YZ plane, so in the YZ plane, we're going to have hyperbolas. So for YZ, I will do the hyperbola this way. So it's going to be, one of them is going to be right here. So this is an YZ plane. And this will be the back of that same hyperbola. Something like this. So that's in YZ plane. Now in XZ plane, we also have hyperbolas. So I'll do that in a different color and we'll put them all together. So here's my hyperbola in XZ plane. Something like this. So this is weird, but let me erase this. So just imagine that this hyperbola is in the back right here. So let's suppose that's in the back. So if I just show you these two and try to show you a graph, so just imagine those two hyperbolas and the rest are in the background. And if you draw your traces in the XY plane, you'll have a picture that looks like this. So this is how a hyperboloid of one sheet looks like. So just be very creative as you're drawing these, so that way you'll have a better idea how this looks like. And now I'm going to extend the blue hyperbola a little bit more this way so that I can show my traces. So these are either ellipses or circles. So there you go. That's your hyperboloid of one sheet. So in the back, we have those other hyperbolas, but it's very difficult to draw for me at the moment. But you can imagine this one right here, this hyperbola in the back, something like this. And then the blue one, it also has another shape somewhere in the back like this. So this is what we call an hyperboloid of one sheet. Hopefully you get an idea what this is. Let's go ahead and sketch this surface. So since I see they're all powers of 2 equal to a constant, 1 negative sign, that means that we're looking at hyperboloid of one sheet. So this negative indicates that it's going to be along the z-axis. So this means our shape is along the z-axis. Now let's go ahead and sketch. So here's our, you can do the traces if you like, but I think I'm just going to go ahead and show you the 3D image. So here is my X, Y, and Z plane. And let me draw the negative Z down here, positive negative X right here, and Y, negative Y, somewhere right there. Now let's take a look at what are the traces in the XY plane. So for XY plane, we're looking at these two pieces, ignoring the Z. So their circles are radius 1. So it's going to look something like this. So it's the unit circle. So here's my circle. This is 1. Let's call that 1, 2. So we have a unit circle in the XY plane. So let me try to do a better job. I'm drawing that. So here's how the graph looks like in XY plane. So the traces are circles in the XY plane. And then we have hyperbolas. So maybe one of them will look like this. And the other one would look like this. And here are the circles. And then there's the other circle. Let's just continue the drawing to something like this. And of course, there's another hyperbola in the YZ plane, so which I didn't get to draw, but you can imagine that there is a hyperbola right here, right behind it. And then there is another one right here across from that. So hopefully you get an idea on how to draw this. And the traces in XY plane, like we said, they're just unit circles. So something like this. So that would be our picture of this hyperboloid of one sheet. Now let's take a look at this one. So again, we have hyperboloid of one sheet because all of these are squared equals to a constant and there is one negative sign. So there is the negative sign, it's in front of X. So that means our graph, that shape will be along this axis, which is X-axis. So let's take a look at how it's going to look like. So here's our X, Y, and Z plane. So I'm gonna just go ahead and label them as always and draw the negative x's as well. Here's negative x, here's negative z, and here is negative y. Now, if you ignore x, you have y squared plus z squared is equal to 1. So it's a unit circle in the yz plane. So 1 unit in the y direction, 1 unit in the z direction. So it'll look something like this. And then we have these hyperbolas in the xz plane and xy plane. So let's suppose, so center is 0. So I didn't mention that, but the center is right here. So I should write that down. The center of this shape is at 0, 0, 0. So my hyperbolas are going to look like this. So I have one right here. And I have a few more on the back, and this is the other one on the front. And you just trace the circles. So something like this. And then here, this is another one, just to have a better idea of how this looks like. So there you have it. This is a hyperboloid of one sheet. So get busy, try practicing some of these drawing. They're not easy, but the more you practice, the better you can produce pictures in 3D. All right, I'll see you next time.